Hey guys, we're back with Project Cheat Code. I'm Matt from ECS, I'm sure you know that by now. And today we have our KW suspension we're gonna be putting on the car. This is KW's V3 Plus kit for the M240. It has low speed compression adjustment and rebound adjustment, which is nice because typically on lower end coilovers, you just have dampening. It's like a general adjustment that happens. This gives you a lot more control over what you're adjusting and what the handling characteristics of your car will be like. On top of that, these are actually stainless, so they're not gonna lock up on you. A lot of lower end coilovers, you get a couple winters in and next thing you know, you can't adjust your ride height anymore. So the nice thing about this is that's never gonna happen with these. They'll always adjust and you'll always be able to get in there and make the adjustments you need without having to worry about getting out your hammer and chisel. I'm really excited to see how the car handles once these are on. So let's get them on here and see what they do. This is a pretty easy job. On a scale of 1 to 10, it's probably like a 4, so it's not that bad. You should have a ratchet, torque wrench for sure, a good socket set. Hopefully yours has a 16 and an 18 because you might need those. This is just a 1/2-inch socket set. In impact, you don't really need it. If you got a breaker bar to break lugs loose and some of the bigger hardware like the lower pinch bolts, that's good enough. So you should have this stuff and sustenance. Make sure you have sustenance. First step obviously is getting the wheel off. We're going to unplug our shock because this is a adaptive suspension car. So we're gonna unplug the shock. Now we're gonna take this shield off. Take your 4 10mm nuts off to take this shield off and it'll just come off. There's just studs on the control arms. We have to undo the control arm bolt that connects it to the knuckle. We have to undo the shock bolt that holds the shock to the control arm, and then we'll have to loosen this because like I said before, these are injected rubber bushings, so they don't like to rotate. So if we take this loose, the entire sleeve can rotate and then we can actually perform the work that we need to perform. This is an 18mm nut and the bolt is also an 18. Okay, this is a 21mm nut with an 18mm bolt. We shouldn't have to really do anything with the bolt because it's an eccentric bolt for alignment purposes. Should be under enough tension not to spin the bolt. Yep, so nut's loose. This is a 21mm nut with an E-Torx. It's a 20. It's a E20. Okay, so now that we have this loose, what you're gonna wanna do is we're going to raise the car so we can get a pull jack under here to push up on the control arm to take the tension off of the bolt because it's under tension from the spring. And we don't wanna just like try to rip this bolt out because the control arm will go flying, the spring will explode, and you'll probably die. So don't do that. So we're gonna raise it up, put a pull jack under it. If you're doing this on a jack at home, it'll already be close to the ground. Get a second jack or have your buddy put his head under here so when you take the bolt out, it doesn't fly down. And yeah, then you'll be good to go. You just pull the jack out and you can get the spring out.
Don't put his head under there.
Yeah, do I really need to do a disclaimer? Don't actually put your friend's head under the control arm when you pull your bolts off. So once you got your pull jack or your floor jack or Ryan's head, just pick up on this a little bit, take some tension out, and then you can pull this bolt out without having to worry about it going flying. This is a little trick of the trade. If you've got a bolt that's giving you trouble because it's a little bit too tight and it just kind of spins when you're trying to take it out, but you can't pull it out by hand, you can either use a ratchet or an impact and spin it and take a wrench and put it on the back side up against the bottom of the head of the bolt, and then you can pull it out. You put pressure on it like that. Now that we have that bolt out, this now has the tension of the spring on it, but we can just lower this down. Once you get to a certain point, you'll feel the tension relieve. Then you can get your jack or your pull jack out of the way. That'll just hang there. Spring comes out. Done, no more spring. Now we can pull the shock. This is kind of what your spring assembly is gonna look like when you go to put it into the car. Your adjuster will be on top, that'll go into the body of the car, then your mainspring, then your little spacer guy that connects your helper spring and your mainspring together. and then your helper spring. So what the helper spring does is, because these springs are a little bit shorter, if you jack the car up at full droop, it's so this spring isn't just rattling around in there. It kind of takes up that extra space that might be necessary, because the shock travel might be a little bit longer than this spring can take up. That's going to depend on kind of where you set your ride height. So this is what it'll look like. This is their spring pad that they're including. This will go into the control arm. This is different just because the control arm has a groove in it that's made for a spring where the coil is consistent and not cut. On these, the coil is cut, so it's flat. So this just makes a nice flat surface for that to sit against once it's in the car. I did get new top hats for the rear as well. Since we're replacing the front, it's just good to keep everything nice and rubber isolator just fell out of the car by itself. It's good to keep everything nice and symmetrical. So this goes on the top here. KW included a nut and a lock nut for this. So there you have it. This is what this will look like. So this is going to be a little bit different as the front, in a sense that we're still going to adjust our rebound and our compression before we put it in, make it even. Like I said, we're going to do 8 clicks because there's 16 total. The difference here is that you kind of want to have an idea of what you want here. If you want a stiffer ride, you should set this a little bit stiffer. If you want a little bit softer ride, you should set this a little bit softer. And why I'm saying that for the rear is that once this is in the car, this is up in the body. So you're not going to be able to adjust this as easily as the front. If you kind of have an idea of what you want, you can set this and then adjust the front to match. But that's the only reason I'm telling you now. I'm still going to set all of this in the middle because we want this car to be able to be suited to a wide variety of people, because we don't know who's going to win it. So the last thing that we're going to do is remove the 3 bolts that hold the stock shock to the body. They are 3 E12 E-Torx bolts. So we'll just break those loose. Snake this down out of here. So once you get your stock shock out, if you replaced your upper shock mounts, you may have also ordered a new gasket and retaining clip. If you didn't, just check to see if this gasket is still good. All this gasket does is it kind of smushes up against the car and keeps water out of this area. If you've got a new one, put it on. If you don't, just check to see if this is good. If it's good, just reuse it. Swap it over to your new shock. Just goes like that. Pops in there. Make sure that you have your rebound set. Now you can see this is not going to be easy to adjust later. Now it's time to see how good you would do in a carnival. So you need to install your spring assembly, which is like 5 pieces. You need to push your control arm back up. Maybe you'll have enough enough ass to push it up high enough to get your bolt in. If not, you should have like a jack or something nearby to get under the control arm, so then you can jack it up high enough to get your bolt in. Something I forgot to mention is if your car has this cup, it's pressed into the body. You need to remove that cup from the body. So have fun with that. Now we're going to install all this nonsense. That goes there. Do that. Make sure that's lined up now. See, I'm not going to have enough ass. So now I need my pull jack. So this is where your juggling comes in. Make sure you smash your fucking expensive ass Apple Watch that your mom got you. That's what I'm talking about. Are you a circus act or are you a flop? I wasn't making fun of anyone with their Apple Watches either. My mom legitimately bought me my Apple Watch. I mentioned to her that I wanted one and she was like, oh, I'll buy you one. So she bought me an Apple Watch. What? My parents love me. I'm sorry yours don't. This is gonna get a little bit weird here. This control arm wants to twist because, like I said, this is a solid rubber joint, so it's gonna wanna sit straight. But when the control arm's all bolted together, it's actually at a bit of an angle. So when you put this bolt in, the hole's gonna line up on one side, but not the other. So you're gonna wanna jack this up, get the bolt in so it's all the way through and touching the control arm on this side, right? And then you're gonna wanna move your pull jack, floor jack, whatever you're using, to like one side of the control arm. You're gonna have to just kind of clip the side of the control arm and then pick up on that side to get the control arm to twist, and then you'll be able to get your bolt lined up. Put the impact on there, and I used the connection that the socket has to the bolt to kind of give it a little bit of sideways leverage and persuade it to be straight, and then just spun it so I had a little bit of help getting it through there. But now it's through, all done. You can remove your jack or your pull jack or whatever. It's not gonna go anywhere. You're good to go. Now we're gonna install our shock bolt. Something you can or cannot keep in mind if you care is the direction that the bolts go. Right, so this bolt was originally in from this direction, so I'm going to do that. Sometimes manufacturers do that for a reason, whether it be clearance or they noticed in testing that like road debris was hitting a nut and backing it off, stuff like that. So sometimes they do that shit on purpose, so it's something that you could keep in mind just in case. So that's good. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Wrapping it up, we're going to tighten down all of our bolts, and then we can put our splash guard back on. This outer joint here where the control arm meets the knuckle, you can tighten down now, not at ride height, because it is a spherical bearing. So it will rotate with the height of the car. Tighten down the shock. Again, make sure you're checking your factory torque specs for whatever car that you're putting this on. And we have an alignment rack in-house, so I'm not going to tighten this because it's going to go straight to the alignment lift. After this is done, I have ride height set. So, but you would want to tighten this and then take it to the alignment shop, and they'll handle that for you. So the last thing is we're going to put our splash guard back on. This isn't really a splash guard as much as it is for like aerodynamics. These are just little 10mm nuts and little studs. So don't go crazy because you will snap those off. You're gonna need a 10mm to undo these little clippies. They're just quarter turns, so please don't spin these in a full circle. Pinch tab right there, easy peasy, comes right out. Got to remove this here rubber john. It just pops out of here. There's a pull tab right here. Pull it out, and then this is just a clip. So this is the clip, you just pull the center out of it, and then it releases this so this can go together, and it just comes out. And then this just has a ridge on it that engages this ridge, so it'll just pull off. We'll have to take these five bolts out and this bolt for the strut brace. You can either leave this here or remove the entire brace, it's kind of up to you. We're gonna leave this for right now because we wanna get the bottom loose. It's better to have this bolted down so you can manipulate the knuckle and get it off of the shock while this is attached than trying to pull them apart with no attachment. This will help you later. Okay, we've got the car up in the air or on a jack. Relax. I'm gonna use one of our trusty Schwaben wheel hangers. These are really nice if you haven't done like a stud conversion yet, which we also sell, and I highly recommend if you're doing work to your car frequently. We sell stud conversion kits for pretty much everything. The next thing we need to do is disconnect all of the electronics that are hooked to these modern suspension components. Just gotta get all these wires out of their holders. This car was equipped with adaptive ride, so it has an extra plug on the shock you gotta undo. And then we have to get this little control box. There we go. And we will swap this over to the KW suspension once we get it in. So I unhooked this wire from this bracket. This bracket is not actually attached to the shock. It will stay in the car when we undo this bolt. So we're gonna take the sway bar link nut loose. Sometimes this will work, sometimes it won't. It did. Sometimes these will be locked up enough where it'll spin this joint. You really don't want to sit there and reef on it with an impact because it'll spin this joint around in here really fast, and it can dispel all the grease, and then this thing will wear out really fast. So we're going to take this pinch bolt loose. The bolt itself is an 18mm. The nut on the backside is a 16. So keep that in mind. Do this step kind of slow when you take this loose. Sometimes these pinch style struts require a spreader to relieve tension on the strut to drop the knuckle down. Sometimes they'll fall. Okay, and this is that bracket that I was talking about. That is not part of the strut, but now you can see we can move it out of the way because we unhooked that wire earlier. So now we're gonna use our Schwaben strut spreader to spread out the knuckle. That way we can get the knuckle off of the strut. Again, watch when you're doing this, because sometimes when you take tension off of here, it'll just fall. Okay, after looking at this, it turns out that we're not gonna be able to just drop this down off with the knuckles still attached to the car, because the bottom of this shock is so long, I can't get enough articulation out of the ball joints to get it all the way off. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna remove the caliper, and then we're going to remove the tie rod and the two control arms. And then we can remove the entire knuckle. Once the whole knuckle's off, then we can pull the strut out. So now that we have the caliper out of the way, we're going to undo our two control arms and our tie rod. Like I said before, these are 21mm nuts. They should break loose fairly easily. And because the ball joint's been seated in there for a while, you will have this. BMW doesn't do steering locks anymore. So the steering rotates. If the ball joint breaks loose from its seat before you manage to get your nut off, then the entire joint is going to spin. BMW is kind enough to put a, looks like probably a T30, I'll have to verify that, Torx head in the base of the ball joint shaft. So you can hold that and then take the nut loose with a wrench. Correction, this is actually a T40 in the bottom of the ball joint. Eventually the nut will get loose enough to not be as tight as the tension inside the ball joint, and then you'll just be able to remove it. I'm just gonna do the same thing here with our T40 to hold that shank. All right, we got that nut off. So last thing we gotta do is undo the tie rod. All right, so that's that. There's one, there's two. So to get this control arm to drop down far enough, you'll also want to take the bolt on the opposite end loose so that joint's not under tension. And then this will just drop down off. Make sure you don't forget, like I did, to unplug your wheel speed sensor. All right, so now that we got all of the control arms undone and the knuckle off and the caliper out of the way and all that shit, we can drop it down, take the top bolts out, and then take the strut out. So you need E18 E-Torx for the brace bolt, and then these are 13mm for the strut bolts. So the first thing we'll take loose is the brace. You will remove your 5 13mm strut bolts. I'm going to break them all loose first, and then because I'm lazy and I don't have all day, I'm going to blast them all out. Leaving one in there so we can get a handle on the strut from down below. Then we take our last one loose. Don't lose it. There you have it. That's your strut. Look at that. How nice. Okay, so the way we would normally do this is we would get ourselves a spring compressor, compress the spring, undo this top nut for the shock, and then remove our mount and our bearing and reuse this on the KWs. However, we found that the bearing isn't in great shape on ours, so we're going to replace this because we want everything to be on this car. So we'll leave this together and get brand new stuff. And then this is the little control box I was talking about. This you'll want to swap over. There's a bracket on the KW suspension as well. So this is a E10. Voila. Okay, now that we have our replacement top mount and it's nice freshy bearing, we can start putting this together. So one thing that you have to do with the KW suspension, because the spring diameter is a little bit smaller, the factory boot for the shock is integrated into the upper spring pad. So we're gonna have to cut the boot off because it will not fit inside of the smaller diameter spring. Okay, now that we have our excess boot cut off, we can install our strut mount. The nice thing is because this is a coilover, you won't need a spring compressor and scratch up your nice yellow springs because you can just spin your collar down. So this goes up here like this, and then make sure that you have the spring in the appropriate location on the boot because it does matter. There's a spot that it sits in, okay? Don't f that up. I know some of you will. So now we're just gonna torque this nut and this will be ready to go in. Then we can set our spring preload. The nut is a 19 millimeter. The shank has a hex on it so you can hold it while you tighten your nut. That is a 9 millimeter. So these are Schwab sockets specifically for this that are cut out on the side. So you can do that. We're gonna try this a different way. There it is. 29 foot-pounds. Like I said, do it in the car. It's a pain in the ass. Before I install these, the one thing I like to do is I like to set my dampening, whether that's just your general dampening or, for instance, this has rebound and low speed bump. So low speed compression. What I like to do is I like to set them in the middle. So these are 16-way adjustable, so 16 clicks. So I'm gonna do 8 clicks. I'm just gonna run it all the way soft or hard. It doesn't matter because we're just shooting for the middle. And I'm going to put them in the middle, so 8 clicks. So 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, then we're gonna go to the top. You're gonna like different things than other people as far as the way the car handles and reacts and whatnot. So I like to just set them in the middle, gives you a good starting point and kind of know where you're at. And then you can drive the car and decide, you know, oh, it's a little bit too soft in the front and a little bit too stiff in the rear. Then you know, like, they're all in the middle, so you can adjust them from there. We are going to install this in here. So here we go. New BMWs, these new top hats have like little alignment dowels. So you want to make sure you got those lined up, or you're going to be fighting this all day. And then you're going to realize, oops, it's because I'm dumb. Then you just get your bolts started. There you have it. Okay, now we're going to torque down our top bolts. Make sure whenever you're doing this on your vehicle that you're checking whatever the manufacturer torque specs are for your hardware. If you've got one of these, when you do this bolt, make sure that you cover up your positive terminal because you will ground that out. Now we're going to reinstall our strut brace bolt. Remember, this is a E-Torx. It's 18. There we go. We're going to, while this is free spinning and we don't have to like be working in the back side of the wheel well, we're gonna reinstall our little sensor boy. Tighten that guy down. So now we're gonna put the knuckle back on. We'll do knuckle first, then get our control arms up in there. Then we can tighten everything down. When you're doing this, make sure that if your car has it, you have the adapter collar. This is just to help them adapt their shocks to different knuckle diameters and whatnot. So if you've got one, make sure it's on there or else this thing will never tighten down, and we're gonna put the knuckle on. Make sure you're careful when you pick this thing up because if you grab it by the rotor, the whole thing will spin, you know, because it's got a wheel bearing in it. And make sure your pin in the back is lined up with the notch. Once you have the knuckle all the way onto the shock, which depending on your car, you'll be able to tell different ways. So the collar bottoms out against a ridge on the shock upwards here, and then the collar bottoms out on a ridge on the knuckle downwards back behind here. So you'll have to look when you're installing this and make sure that you have the collar inside, bottomed out against the shock body, and then the collar outside bottomed out against the knuckle ridge back in here. Once that's done, you can take your spreader out and it should stay. It should put enough tension on it to stay. This arm goes over the top of the tie rod, and when these are all hanging, you can actually get them the other way around. Just make sure that these are all in the right orientation for this when you put your shit box back together. You want to have your nuts with you. That way, when you get these up in here, you can put the nut on, because if you don't, it'll just fall back out. Make sure you check on your car. Like I said, check torque specs for your specific model, and a lot of these on a lot of cars are locking nuts, and the manufacturer does normally recommend that you replace them after you remove them, because after they're tightened down then taken off, the theory is that that pinch isn't as adhering anymore, so it's not really a locking nut anymore. Just check with your manufacturer if you should be replacing these when you take them off. So now we're going to tighten these to spec, and we can move on to the sway bar link. So I'm going to plug in our ABS wheel speed sensor really quick, just because that's back behind all of this. And now we're going to put the caliper back on, so we're just going to undo it from our little hook that we had it hanging from and reinstall it, which should be super easy because we spread out the pads earlier. Yep, there we go. And we'll reinstall our 2 bolts in the backside. Now remember, these are 18s. Make sure you take your hook out. I see those left in wheel wells all the time, so pay attention to that. Now we can install our pinch bolt now that the caliper is in place. We can get our bracket back up in here. Now double check that this seat and this seat it's all still seated together and none of this shifted during your install or anything, because you might have to get this knuckle up on here a little bit more, but ours didn't move because there was enough force in the pinch bolt. So that goes just like that. And then our pinch bolt goes through all of it. Then our nut goes on. Easy as that. And then we can reinstall our little rubber grommets for our wire. Keep that in place and out of the wheel. There we have it. So now we can turn our wheel back straight and we can hook up our sway bar link. Okay, so we're going to cut KW's little zip tie boy. There we go. So we can have our nut, our new nut, that nice new nut. And then the sway bar goes right there. The factory nut was a 16, KW's is a 15 on this set. So it's a little different. Now all we have left to do is plug in our little sensor here that's bolted to the strut. Plug that in, make sure the wire is up in its little groove here. Now that we have the front installation all done, really all that's left is putting some covers back on. So we'll put this guy back first. Same as removal, just backwards. You slip it over the hood guard or the hood seal there, and then it just snaps down on there. Part of this goes under the fender, part of it goes over, and then the clip goes in the hole, and you push the center in. This nice guy here goes into a groove in the center, just like that. It drops down, clips in here. There we go. And then quarter turns. Sometimes you can get them with your hands, sometimes you can't. Just depends. Make sure, like I said, you tighten down your control arms at ride height, and then you're ready to put your splash guard back in. Also make sure that your clips for your battery cable, if you have this here, or you had to do anything like this, make sure everything is reassembled here. And reinstall your splash guard. And you just gotta put your screws in, you're all done. So now that you got all of your suspension installed and you kind of got set up the way you want before we put it on the ground and we put the wheels back on it, the last thing you'll do is, if your car has dynamic suspension, you'll have to install KW's cancellation kit. The installation's super simple. KW gives you everything you need to do it. That way you don't have any lights when this is all said and done. Pretty much it's just this nice little barrel, and they supply you with the appropriate connector. So you'll need to depin your factory connector, pin this connector, and then it'll all be plug and play. They supply you with these really awesome little zip ties with little clips. Makes it really easy to mount someplace in your wheel well. Once you get it all done, you can find it a safe place in your wheel well and get it zip tied out of the way. And then you're pretty much all done. All right guys, we got the KW suspension put on this bad boy. I'm excited to see how it feels. Don't forget, every $50 you spend is an entry to win this bad boy. And if you haven't already picked up your own set of KW coilovers, that's double entries. And that goes for any parts that are sold by a sponsor on our build. So make sure you like, share, subscribe, all the things you do on YouTube. I gotta get back to work, put some more awesome parts on this car, and we'll see you next time.